Once upon a time, in a quiet town called Millbrook, a girl named Mia stood in the middle of a busy street, threw out both arms, and screamed a name into the path of a speeding car. That single moment would change everything, but to understand why she was standing there and who she was screaming for, we have to go back 3 months. Before we do, if stories like this keep you up past midnight refreshing your feed, hit subscribe now, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and smash that like button. It helps this story reach more people who need to hear it. Now, let's go back to where it all began. Mia was 23 years old, and she had not felt truly safe in a house since her father died 5 years earlier. After his funeral, her stepmother, Diane Hartwell, had taken over everything: the house, the money, the decisions, and Mia's life.
Really thought you could escape
Diane
this.
had 2 rules for Mia: work, obey. There was no third option. Every morning,
really
Mia
thought you
woke
could
before
escape
sunrise to clean a house she once called home, cook meals she was rarely allowed to eat first, and listen to Diane's voice cut through the kitchen like a blade. "You should be grateful," Diane would say, arms crossed, watching Mia scrub a floor that was already clean. "Grateful I didn't throw you out the day your father closed his eyes." Mia never argued. Arguing only made it worse. She had learned that silence was armor. Once, years earlier, she had tried. She had stood in that same kitchen and said quietly, "This was my father's house too." Diane had crossed the room so fast, Mia hadn't seen the slap coming until her cheek was already burning. "Your father is dead," Diane had said, voice flat as stone, "and dead men don't own anything." Mia never said it again. She simply worked and waited and told herself that surviving was its own kind of winning, even when it didn't feel like winning at all. Diane's 2 daughters, grown and married off years earlier to men with money of their own, visited twice a year, always dressed like they were attending someone else's funeral, always looking at Mia the way people look at furniture they don't remember buying. No one at that table had asked Mia a single question about her life in longer than she could remember. But on one gray Tuesday morning, silence wasn't going to save her. Diane walked into the kitchen with a smile that made Mia's stomach turn. Diane only smiled like that when she was about to hurt someone. "I've made a decision," Diane said. "You're getting married." Mia's hands stopped moving over the dishes. "Married? To who? Does it matter?" Diane laughed, the sound sharp and cold. "He's nobody. A man who sleeps outside the old train station. No home, no money, no family. I found him myself." Mia's breath caught. "You want me to marry a homeless man?" "I want you," Diane said, stepping closer, "to understand exactly what you are worth to this family." "Nothing. So I found you a husband who matches that perfectly." Mia felt the floor tilt beneath her. "Please, don't do this." "The wedding is Saturday," Diane said, already turning away, already done with the conversation. "Wear something plain. We don't want to embarrass him." That Saturday, at a small courthouse with peeling paint and flickering lights, Mia stood next to a man she had never met. His clothes were worn thin, his hands were rough. His eyes, though, his eyes were calm in a way that didn't match his circumstances. While Diane whispered cruel jokes to her friends in the back row, laughing behind gloved hands, the man beside Mia said nothing. He didn't defend himself. He didn't look ashamed either. He simply watched the room like he was studying it. When the officiant asked if he took Mia to be his wife, he answered clearly, "I do." His name, Mia learned only minutes before the ceremony, was Ethan. A handful of Diane's friends had come only to watch, whispering behind their programs, phones raised to capture the humiliation for whatever gossip circle would appreciate it most. One of them laughed loud enough for the officiant to pause. "Some people," the officiant muttered, clearly uncomfortable, before continuing anyway, because the paperwork had already been filed, and there was, apparently, nothing improper about a wedding built entirely on cruelty. After the wedding, Diane didn't even wait for them to leave the building. "You're on your own now," she said to Mia, tossing her a small bag of clothes. "Don't come back here." "Diane," Mia said, one last time, some small part of her still hoping for a shred of the woman who used to at least pretend to care. "Please. Goodbye, Mia," Diane said, and turned without looking back, her heels echoing down the courthouse hallway until the sound disappeared entirely. And just like that, the girl who had grown up in a grand house was walking out into the cold with a stranger, carrying everything she owned in a single bag. Ethan didn't say much as they walked. Finally, outside a narrow building with a flickering sign, he stopped. "This is where I stay," he said. "It's small, but it's warm enough." The room was one space: a bed, a small stove, a window with a crack in the corner. Mia had grown up in a house with marble floors. Now she stood in a room the size of her old closet. She should have felt like her life was over. Instead, for the first time in years, no one was screaming at her. That night, Ethan gave her the bed and took the floor without being asked. "You don't have to do that," Mia said quietly. "I want to," Ethan answered. "You've had enough people take things from you today." Something about the way he said it made Mia's throat tighten. She turned toward the wall so he wouldn't see her eyes fill with tears. The next few weeks passed in a rhythm Mia hadn't expected. Ethan left early each morning for work she didn't fully understand. Sometimes construction sites, sometimes deliveries, sometimes places he wouldn't name. He never came home empty-handed. Bread, vegetables. Once, a small bar of soap that smelled like lavender, which he handed to her without a word, like it was nothing, though Mia held onto it for days before using it. She started to notice things. The way he spoke, when he spoke, was different from the other men who lived near the train station. His words were careful, precise, like someone who had once given speeches, not begged for change. The way strangers sometimes looked at him twice on the street, then quickly looked away, like they were trying not to stare at someone they recognized. The way, one evening, a black car slowed near their building, and Ethan stepped in front of Mia without thinking, his whole body suddenly alert, before the car simply drove on. "Who was that?" Mia asked. "No one," Ethan said, but his jaw was tight, and his eyes followed the car until it disappeared. Despite the strangeness, despite the poverty, Mia found herself looking forward to the sound of his footsteps each evening. He asked about her day. He listened when she spoke, really listened, in a way no one in Diane's house ever had. He never once raised his voice. One night, over a small pot of soup, Mia found herself laughing, really laughing, for the first time in years, at some quiet, dry joke Ethan made about the neighbor's cat that kept stealing his shoes. "You have a good laugh," Ethan said, watching her. "You should do it more." "I haven't had much reason to," Mia admitted. "Then let's find reasons," he said simply. The next morning, Mia woke to find a single wildflower resting on the windowsill, still damp with dew, as if Ethan had picked it on his way home and forgotten to give it to her the night before. She didn't ask. She placed it in a cracked jar of water on the table and left it there for the rest of the week, watching it slowly wilt, unwilling to throw it away. Days folded into each other in a rhythm that felt, for the first time in Mia's adult life, like peace. She learned Ethan hummed old songs under his breath when he thought she wasn't listening. She learned he always gave the last piece of bread to her, claiming he wasn't hungry, though his stomach betrayed him with a low growl he tried to hide. She learned he flinched, just slightly, whenever a car engine revved too loudly nearby, though he never explained why, and she never pushed. In return, she found herself opening in ways she hadn't allowed herself in years. She told him about her real father, a quiet man who used to sit with her on the porch and point out constellations, promising her the world without ever actually offering her any of it, just the wonder of looking up. "He sounds like he loved you," Ethan said one evening, listening closely. "He did," Mia said. "I just don't understand why he left everything to a woman who hated me the moment he was gone." "Sometimes the people we trust most," Ethan said quietly, "aren't who we think they are until it's too late to matter." Mia didn't know yet how true those words would become. One evening, walking home from the market with a small bag of rice, Mia noticed a boy no older than 10, sitting against the wall of their building, shivering, his shoes worn through at the soles. Without thinking, she knelt down and handed him half of what she'd bought. "You didn't have to do that," Ethan said afterward. "Neither did you," Mia said, "when you gave me your bed and slept on the floor the first night we were strangers to each other." Ethan didn't answer, but something in his expression softened further, like a wall, quietly lowering brick by brick. It was around the fourth week that Mia began noticing small inconsistencies, not because she was suspicious, but because she had started, without meaning to, paying attention to every detail of a man she was slowly, cautiously falling for. She noticed the calluses on his hands didn't match someone who had lived on the street his whole life. They looked newer, like they'd been earned recently, not over years. She noticed the way he sometimes caught himself mid-sentence, using a word too polished, too precise, before quickly softening his language again. She noticed, most of all, a folded newspaper tucked beneath a loose floorboard, which she found once, while sweeping, and never mentioned, though the headline had made her stomach twist. Calder Group CEO, missing, presumed dead after car accident on corporate retreat. She told herself it meant nothing. Poor men could resemble missing billionaires in a blurry newspaper photograph. She wanted, more than she wanted the truth, to keep the version of Ethan she had already fallen for. But some truths don't stay buried just because we want them to. If this story is already pulling at your heart, don't scroll past. Comment the word "reveal" below if you think you already know what's coming. Trust me, you don't. Let's continue. 6 weeks into the marriage, everything changed in a single afternoon. Mia had gone to bring Ethan his lunch at a job site he'd mentioned near the edge of town, an old office building being renovated. She turned a corner and stopped cold. Ethan was standing in the lobby, but he wasn't in work clothes. He wore a dark suit that fit him like it had been made for him, because it had. A group of men in equally expensive suits stood around him, nodding, taking notes as he spoke. His voice was different too, commanding, certain. "I want the numbers on my desk by Friday," Ethan was saying, "and get legal to look at every contract Renata signed in my absence, every single one." One of the men glanced up and saw Mia standing frozen in the doorway. The room went silent. Ethan turned. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Not embarrassment, but the look of a man who had been caught holding a secret too long. "Mia," he said, "let me explain." "Who are you?" Mia whispered. He walked toward her slowly, the men behind him watching. "My name really is Ethan," he said. "Ethan Calder." The name meant nothing to Mia at first. Then one of the men behind him said quietly, "The board is waiting, Mr. Calder," and it hit her like a wave. Calder Group, the company whose name was printed on buildings across 3 states, the company that had been in the news for months because its owner had mysteriously vanished after a hostile attempt to seize control of it. "You're him," Mia said slowly, "the missing billionaire. Everyone thought you were dead." "I needed everyone to think that," Ethan said. "My business partner, Renata, tried to force me out last year. She forged signatures, manipulated the board, and when I refused to hand over control, my car was run off the road. I survived, but I let the world believe I hadn't. I disappeared completely, no name, no money, no home, because it was the only way to stay alive long enough to fight back." Mia's mind raced back over every evening they'd shared in that tiny room. The flinch at loud engines, the folded newspaper under the floorboard, the calluses that never quite matched a man born to the street. Every piece she had quietly ignored suddenly locked into place at once, and the weight of it nearly buckled her knees. "The flinch," she whispered. "Every time a car got close. That wasn't nerves, that was the accident." "Yes," Ethan said quietly. "Yes," Ethan said quietly. "I'm sorry you had to live beside that without understanding it. I gave a stranger half my rice," Mia said, half to herself, "and cried myself to sleep more than once over a man I thought had nothing, while he was quietly deciding when to trust me with the truth. And me?" Mia's voice shook. "Was I part of that plan too? A convenient wife to hide behind?" "No," Ethan said quickly. stepping closer. "I swear to you, no. Your stepmother found me at the train station. She had no idea who I was. She wanted to humiliate you by marrying you to a nobody. She never knew she was handing you to the one person in this city Renata hasn't found yet." Mia's mind was spinning. So this whole time, the small room, the odd jobs, was real, Ethan said. "Every part of it was real. My feelings for you are real. I was going to tell you. I was building up the courage." Mia stared at him, anger and shock, and something like relief, all crashing together at once. "You should have trusted me from the start," she said. "I know," Ethan answered. "I'm asking you to trust me now." That night, Ethan brought Mia to a place she never imagined she'd stand in again. A mansion, gates tall enough to swallow the sky, staff lined up in the entrance hall. Ashford estate, his family home, empty for over a year. "This is yours now too," Ethan said as they stood in the marble foyer, "if you want it." Mia walked slowly through the halls that night, her fingers trailing over furniture wrapped in white sheets, over portraits of a family she didn't know yet. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like stepping into a stranger's life. "I don't know how to be someone who lives here," she admitted. "You don't have to know yet," Ethan said. "We'll learn it together." The days that followed were stranger than Mia expected. She caught herself making her own bed out of habit, until a member of the staff gently told her it wasn't necessary anymore, and something about that small kindness made her want to cry, for reasons she couldn't fully explain. She found herself eating in the kitchen with the staff, rather than the vast dining hall, more comfortable among people who reminded her of the life she'd just left than the one she'd apparently always been entitled to. "You don't have to prove you belong here," Ethan told her one night, finding her sitting on the kitchen floor with a cup of tea instead of the formal sitting room. "This house doesn't decide who you are. You already decided that, back when you had nothing. It's hard to unlearn feeling like a guest in someone else's life," Mia admitted. "Then let me remind you every day until it isn't," Ethan said, sitting down on the floor beside her, still in his tailored shirt, not caring in the slightest how it looked. But peace didn't last long. 3 days later, a woman walked into Ashford Estate without an appointment, without knocking, dressed in white as if she already owned the place. Renata. "So the rumors are true," Renata said, looking Mia up and down like she was inspecting furniture. Ethan called her, alive, and married to a maid. "Get out of my house," Ethan said, his voice low. "Careful," Renata said, smiling. "I still sit on your board. And soon, I'll have proof this marriage is a fraud, a desperate man's scheme to secure sympathy votes before a shareholder meeting. The press will love it." "There's no scheme," Mia said, stepping forward despite the fear in her chest. "I didn't even know who he was." "That," Renata said, "makes it an even better story for the headlines. Poor helpless maid, tricked into marrying a fugitive billionaire, or a con artist, depending on which version sells more papers." "You ran his car off the road," Mia said, the words leaving her before she could stop them. "Everyone in this room knows it. Why does no one say it out loud?" For just a moment, something flickered behind Renata's composed expression. Not guilt, Mia would realize later, but irritation at being seen so clearly by someone she'd dismissed as beneath her notice. "Careful, little maid," Renata said, voice softening into something almost pleasant, which made it worse. "Accusations without proof are just noise. And noise doesn't win boardroom votes. Proof does. I intend to have plenty of it by the end of the week." She turned on her heel and left without waiting for a response, her heels clicking against the marble like a countdown. After Renata left, the estate felt colder than the small room by the train station ever had. "She'll come after you now," Ethan said quietly. "Not just me." "Then let her come," Mia said, surprising even herself. "I have survived worse than her." But Renata was patient and cruel in ways Mia hadn't accounted for. Within days, she found her way to the one person who still hated Mia enough to help her, Diane. Diane arrived at Ashford Estate with a smile far too warm for a woman who had once thrown Mia out with a single bag of clothes. "My darling girl," Diane said, arms wide, as if the last 5 years hadn't happened. Look at you, a grand house. I always knew you were destined for greatness. You forced me to marry a homeless man to humiliate me, Mia said flatly. Don't pretend otherwise. Diane's smile flickered but held. Water under the bridge, we're family. What do you want, Diane? A woman named Renata came to see me, Diane said, dropping the warmth instantly. She offered a great deal of money for a signed statement, something about how I arranged this marriage as part of a plan with Ethan, how you two knew exactly who he was all along. That's a lie, Mia said. It doesn't have to be true, Diane said, shrugging. It just has to be believable, and with the right amount of money, I can make anything believable. You would do that? To me? I did far worse for far less, Diane said, turning toward the door. You have 3 days to convince me otherwise, or I sign. After Diane left, Mia stood frozen in the hallway for a long time, the echo of the front door still hanging in the air. It wasn't the threat itself that hurt most, it was how easily it had come. Diane hadn't hesitated. She hadn't even pretended to struggle with the decision. 5 years of silence between them, and money had unlocked her cruelty faster than anything else ever had. Ethan found her there minutes later, and when she told him what Diane had said, his face didn't fill with panic the way she expected. It filled with something quieter and colder. She's done this before, he said. Renata, she finds the weakest point in a person's life and pulls until something breaks. She did it to 2 of my former board members before she came for me. Then how do we stop her? We don't stop her by playing defense, Ethan said. We stop her by finding something she doesn't expect us to have. Over the next 2 days, the estate transformed into something closer to a war room than a home. Lawyers arrived at odd hours. Ethan barely slept, poring over old contracts by lamplight, searching for any inconsistency in Renata's paper trail. Mia, unable to simply wait on the sidelines, asked to help, and Ethan, after a long pause, agreed. There's a private study upstairs, he said. My father's old office. Nothing's been touched since before he died. If there's anything buried in this house that could help us, it's probably in there. It was in that study, surrounded by dust and old ledgers, that Mia first noticed a locked drawer that didn't match the rest of the unlocked furniture around it. The only thing in the entire room someone had once bothered to secure. Meanwhile, Renata was not idle. She held a private dinner with 2 board members Ethan had counted as allies, subtly planting doubt over expensive wine. I only ask that you consider the optics, she said smoothly, watching their faces carefully. A man vanishes for over a year, presumed dead, and returns suddenly married to a woman with no public record, no family of note, discovered conveniently sleeping outside a train station. Doesn't that story sound a little too convenient to any of you? By the time the dinner ended, 2 votes that had once been certain were no longer certain at all. On the second night, exhausted and increasingly desperate, Mia sat alone in the study, long after Ethan had gone to try and salvage what remained of those wavering votes over the phone. She ran her fingers along the edge of the old desk, more out of restless frustration than hope, when her hand caught on a drawer that didn't budge. She almost gave up. She almost walked away and let it stay locked, another forgotten piece of a house, full of forgotten pieces. But something, perhaps the same instinct that had once made her hand half a bag of rice to a shivering stranger, told her to keep trying. She found a thin letter opener in the top drawer and worked it carefully into the lock until, with a soft click, it gave way. If you've ever had someone in your own family choose money over you, type "I understand" in the comments right now. This next part is for you. Inside were papers yellowed with age, partnership documents, decades old, bearing 2 signatures at the bottom. One was Ethan's father, the other was Mia's father. Mia's hands went cold as she read further. Her father and Ethan's father had built the earliest version of Calder Group together as equal partners before her father's name was quietly erased from every record after his death. His shares transferred through paperwork Mia had never seen, signed shortly before he died by a signature that did not match his handwriting anywhere else in the documents. The forged signature belonged to Diane. Mia sat on the floor of that study for a long time, papers scattered around her, understanding finally settling into her bones like ice water. Diane hadn't married her father for love. She had married him for exactly this, and when he died before she could fully seize control, she had turned every ounce of her resentment onto the one person who reminded her of what she'd taken, Mia. The marriage to Ethan hadn't been random cruelty. It had been Diane trying to bury Mia in humiliation so complete that no one would ever look closely enough to find these papers. She hadn't known Ethan's true identity. That part was true. But she had known exactly what she stole from Mia's father, and exactly how far she'd go to make sure it never came to light. Before she brought the documents downstairs, Mia sat alone in that study for a while longer, papers still scattered at her feet, and let herself simply feel everything at once. The grief for a father she now understood had been erased twice, once by death and once by greed, and something else, quieter, sitting beneath the grief. She thought of the wildflower on the windowsill, the half bag of rice, the floor Ethan had slept on without being asked. Whatever came next, whatever the papers meant for the company, for Renata, for Diane, she realized she did not want to face any of it without him beside her. She found him in the hallway outside, waiting, sensing something in her silence. "Whatever's in there," Ethan said gently. "You don't have to carry it alone." "I know," Mia said. "I think that's what scares me most. I've spent so long being alone that I don't know what to do with someone who keeps choosing to stay." "Then, let me make it simple," Ethan said, stepping closer, taking her hands in his. "I love you. Not the version of you that might own half of this company, not the woman standing in a mansion, the one who gave a stranger her rice on a cold street and slept beside a man she barely knew because she had nowhere else to go, and somehow still found room to laugh at his terrible jokes about a cat." Mia felt something in her chest finally loosen, weeks of fear and uncertainty giving way all at once. "I love you too," she said. "I think I have since the night you gave me the bed and took the floor, and I was too afraid to admit it because I didn't know yet who you really were." "You knew exactly who I was," Ethan said quietly. "You just hadn't heard my name yet." Mia brought the documents downstairs that night, her hands shaking as she laid them on his desk. Ethan read them twice, his face going pale, then hard. "Your father didn't just marry into money," he said quietly. "He built half of what I inherited, which means legally. I own part of this," Mia finished. "I've owned part of this the whole time, and she stole it and then punished me for existing. This changes everything," Ethan said. "This isn't just about surviving Renata's vote anymore." "No," Mia said, and for the first time in 5 years, her voice didn't shake. "Now it's about taking back what's mine." The morning of the shareholder meeting, the room was filled with board members, lawyers, and reporters crowded outside the doors, tipped off by Renata herself, expecting a scandal that would end Ethan Calder's career for good. Renata stood at the front of the room, radiant with confidence, a folder of documents in her hand, the false statement Diane had signed the night before, selling out the last person who had ever tried to love her. "Before we begin," Renata announced to the room, "I have new evidence that this marriage was a calculated scheme to manipulate this company's shareholders." A signed statement from the bride's own stepmother. Gasps rippled through the room. Cameras flashed outside the glass walls. Ethan stood calmly. "Before you present that," he said, "I'd like to submit something of my own." He nodded to Mia, who stepped forward, her heart hammering, and placed the real documents on the table in front of the entire board. "My name is Mia Hartwell," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent room. "My father, James Hartwell, co-founded this company alongside Ethan's father. His shares were stolen from him through a forged signature after his death, a signature that belongs to my stepmother, Diane. She placed the original partnership agreement on the table, side by side with the forged transfer document, the difference in handwriting now undeniable under the room's bright lights. Renata built her entire case today on a statement paid for by a woman who has spent years erasing my father's legacy to protect a lie she's kept for over a decade," Mia continued. I'd like the board to ask itself, which story sounds more like manipulation, mine or hers? The room erupted into whispered chaos. A forensic document expert, quietly retained by Ethan's legal team days earlier, stepped forward to confirm what the papers already showed. The signature was forged, dated to match records that had been altered years after the fact. Reporters outside the glass walls pressed closer, sensing the story shifting beneath their feet in real time. One of them mouthed to a colleague, already typing furiously on his phone, "This just became a completely different headline." Renata's face went white. "This is absurd," she said, her voice cracking for the first time. "This proves nothing about the marriage itself. It's a distraction." "On the contrary," the forensic expert said calmly, adjusting his glasses, "it proves the credibility of your primary witness is worthless. A woman who forges signatures to steal a dead man's company is not a reliable source on the authenticity of a marriage." Renata's eyes darted toward the board members she had wined and dined only days earlier, searching for support. Both of them looked away. "Someone want to explain?" one board member said slowly, rising from his seat. "Why we were nearly asked to remove a sitting CEO based on a statement bought from a woman currently under suspicion of forgery and fraud." "I was misled," Renata said quickly. "You built the entire case," Ethan said, stepping forward, his voice steady in a way Mia had never heard from him before. "You didn't ask a single question about where that statement came from because you didn't want the answer. You wanted the headline before the vote. It proves," one of the board's senior members said slowly, standing up, "that you built today's entire case on a lie. You were sold by a woman who forges signatures for a living. I move we table the no-confidence vote immediately and open a full investigation into Ms. Renata's conduct over the past year, including the incident involving Mr. Calder's vehicle." The vote to remove Renata from the board passed within the hour, unanimous except for her own. Diane, informed by a frantic phone call from Renata that the deal had collapsed and dragged her name into a fraud investigation, arrived at Ashford Estate that evening, not with warmth this time, but with panic written across every line of her face. "You have no idea what you've done," Diane said, storming into the foyer. "I'll be ruined." "You ruined yourself," Mia said, standing in the same hall she had once walked through, feeling like a stranger. She didn't feel like a stranger anymore. "The moment you forged my father's signature, I just made sure the truth finally caught up to you. I raised you," Diane said, her voice breaking. "I gave you a home. You gave me a floor to sleep on in a house that was never yours to give," Mia said. "My father built half of everything you controlled. You stole it, then punished me for the fact that I existed as a reminder. And when that wasn't enough, you sold out the one bit of happiness I finally found, for money, without blinking." "I did what I had to do to survive after he died," Diane said, and for one brief moment, something almost like honesty broke through the panic. "You don't know what it's like to watch a company you helped build slip through your fingers because your name wasn't on a single page of it." "I do know," Mia said quietly. "You just made sure I'd spend the last 5 years finding out the hard way, scrubbing your floors, while you decided which parts of my father's life were worth keeping and which parts you could quietly erase." Diane opened her mouth, but no defense came. For the first time since Mia's father had died, Diane had nothing left to threaten her with. Her hands, once so steady while signing away a dead man's legacy, trembled now at her sides. "What happens to me?" Diane finally asked, and for the first time, she sounded less like a woman giving orders and more like one realizing how few options remained. "That's not up to me anymore," Mia said. "It's up to the investigators and the truth, which you spent a decade trying to bury under my name instead of yours." "Get out," Ethan said quietly, stepping beside Mia. "The investigators will want to speak with you. I'd suggest a lawyer." Diane left Ashford Estate that night, the same way Mia once had, with nothing but what she could carry, except this time, no one handed her a bag on her way out the door. In the weeks that followed, the forgery case moved quickly. Diane's assets were frozen pending investigation. Renata quietly settled outside of court to avoid criminal charges tied to the attack on Ethan's car, her name stripped from every board she'd ever sat on. Calder Group's shares, once contested, were legally restructured to reflect what should have always been true. A partnership, restored, between two families who had built something together long before either Mia or Ethan were born. Mia used part of her restored inheritance to open a small shelter near the old train station, not far from the narrow building where she and Ethan had once shared a single room and a bed she hadn't wanted to take from him. She hired staff who understood what it meant to have nothing, and she made sure no child who walked through those doors ever had to hand over half a bag of rice just to feel like they mattered. On a quiet afternoon months later, Ashford Estate held a small ceremony. No reporters, no board members, just people who genuinely cared to be there. Mia stood at the same doors where she'd once walked in, feeling like a burden passed from one house to another, and this time she walked forward as herself, toward a man who had never once needed her to be anyone else. "I once told you I'd help you find reasons to laugh," Ethan said, holding both her hands. "I didn't know then you'd give me an entire life to laugh in. I once thought the worst day of my life was standing in that courthouse next to a stranger," Mia said. "It turned out to be the first day of everything good that came after." They renewed their vows that afternoon, this time with her real name spoken proudly, her father's legacy restored beside her, not buried beneath someone else's lie. And that cold open from the very beginning, the moment Mia threw herself into traffic, screaming a name, makes sense now, doesn't it? It wasn't danger from Renata or violence from Diane. It was months later, on an ordinary afternoon, when Ethan stepped absent-mindedly off a curb while laughing at something Mia said, not noticing the delivery truck running the light beside him. She didn't think. She simply moved, pulling him back onto the sidewalk half a second before it would have been too late, her heart pounding, not from fear of losing a fortune, or a name, or a company, but from the simple, human terror of almost losing the one person who had ever loved her exactly as she was. Some twists in life aren't about billion-dollar companies or forged signatures. Sometimes the biggest twist is realizing the girl who once had nothing to lose has finally found everything worth holding on to. If this story moved you, let me know in the comments which moment hit hardest: the courthouse, the reveal in that office lobby, or the forged signature in the drawer. Hit subscribe if you want more stories like this one, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that truth always finds its way to the surface. Thank you for watching until the very end.